All right, thanks so much, Teresa, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Saturday morning, especially as we have some, well, in the Bay Area, the rain is cleared, so it's a nice day to be out. So just acknowledging the rest of our CRS team that's here. So we have Teresa, our Executive Director, Corinne, one of our program managers, Betsy Mitchell is one of our educators, and myself also serving as an educator within CRS. We're really excited to be partnering with NCSE. We've done multiple programs this fall including Kate Carter, who's the I think somebody might be on. If you could put yourself on mute, possibly. I'm hearing some background from one participant, maybe. Well, Kate was gracious enough to provide a keynote address at our kickoff in September for our Energy and Climate Science series of programs. And this is the second to last official workshop that we'll be offering as part of this series. So we've offered, this will be the 10th workshop. We have one more coming up on December 3rd from a partner called the Energy Coalition. That'll be Thursday afternoon from 3:30 to 5. So if you want to pin your calendars for that final workshop. And then we'll be exploring some new opportunities, including professional learning communities as a third component of our series of programs. So stay tuned for that. There'll be some emails and correspondence going out and some information on the CRS website as we look into that PLC concept and the idea of taking some of these energy and climate science literacy further through small working groups. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our two leads today. So we have, of course, we have Kate Carter joining us, but the two leads from NCSE team are Emma Doctors, CRS program staff member, and we also have Catherine Henry, and they'll be our leads today in the program. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Emma and again say thank you for hosting this workshop this morning.
Thank you so much again for joining us this morning. And it's great to know where you're signing in from and what grade you teach. I'm right now signing in from Oakland, and Catherine is in Michigan. And again, we just wanted to thank you. And we're from the National Center for Science Education. And today we're going to do some engineering design challenges related to climate change. And at NCSE, we believe that everyone should be able to engage with the evidence and really have access to climate and evolution content. So thanks again for joining us today. And to take a look at what we're going to be running through today, we are going to go through an introduction to these design challenges, how to do effective facilitation. And we adapted a little bit the 5E model. And through that process, Catherine and I are both going to walk you through two different challenges that we have today, two activities called Rising Tides and one called Cool Cities. And if you're interested in learning more about these activities and some of the others that we have on our website, Catherine's going to pop a link into the chat box, and as well, you can check out the URL below. And these are our DIY SCI activities from the Breaking Down Barriers program. So we hope that you'll get a chance to look into some of those. Now, today we're going to be talking about the engineering design process. And I'd be interested to see in the chat box how many of you are familiar with this process. So go ahead and add your answer into the chat box. If you're familiar with this, if this is your first time seeing this process. Okay, great. So I see some answers somewhat familiar. There's a STEM program at your school. Okay, great. First time. Okay, all right. So we have a little bit of a range, and that is absolutely okay. We've done design thinking challenges. Okay, great. This is really helpful. So with this engineering design process, you can think about this as a design thinking process where students are thinking through this process internally, or in this case with some of our activities, this is the process that we went through to actually build our physical kits and have something tangible to be able to relate to these design thinking concepts. So as an example, with one of the activities you'll see, we are going to be defining an issue. So what do we want to think about related to climate change? What is our end goal? Imagine, what do we want to have as the creative component to this process? Build it. Again, this can be physical or this can be just mentally thinking through all the steps. Test it. Again, the first time that you build a product or you're thinking through an activity, it may not always work. So you just continue to try and adapt it. And you might have constraints such as geographic constraints, materialistic constraints, perhaps not everybody has the same prior knowledge in your class. So you can just continue to test these activities and improve it. And it can be this continual cycle that you can do with your students. And to learn more about this process, just for the sake of time, I went through this a little bit quickly, but to learn more about this process, there are a lot of resources online that give different examples of how you can go through this with your students. Okay, and to take a look at some of the NGSS connections, these are just a few of the connections that we have been able to make with the two activities that we are showing. But if you take a look at the training guides accompanying these activities, you'll find some DCIs and performance expectations, as well as some more NGSS connections. And I know that all of you are teaching a wide variety of grade levels, so hopefully you'll be able to find something that will be a comfortable fit for your students. But these are more so focusing on middle school and high school, just to give you an idea of some of the content. All righty, so today we are going to be talking about how do you do this process effectively. Now, one thing, especially related to climate change, that we want to think about is focusing on solutions and having that positive outlook, while also thinking about the fact that we are the problem, and having the balance between those two to really garner action and to decrease climate anxiety, because especially in younger folks and our students, that can be a really big issue. And so in the classroom, having these really important conversations around climate change and solutions, while also figuring out how to take action and how we can take steps as a group, as a community, to really focus on a local issue and overcome that challenge. That's really going to be a successful way to do this. And again, like I mentioned, making it local, pinpointing on a local issue is something that's going to be digestible and understandable for your students. And it's also going to make it very personal. And it's a great way, especially for young kids who might get climate anxiety, thinking about all of the issues around the globe. If they can take a look at something that's local, this can be really successful, and they can really understand what steps they need to take. And it's really great way to make it less of make less anxiety around the issue and really garner a lot of that action.
And Emma, maybe if you don't mind just jumping in on that, really
Sure.
appreciate that approach. One of the pieces that is becoming increasingly important is culturally relevant pedagogy. And so this is an opportunity, again, if you make it local and your students kind of are really expressing their own concerns from their own neighborhoods, from their own cultures, from what they feel is important, it's just another opportunity to really bring in that relevancy to them. So really appreciate that.
Absolutely. That's a really great point. And I think that's fantastic for all educators and students to have that dialogue and really have it be a two-way learning, where everybody knows what each of your students' priorities are and where they're coming from, because it can really affect people very differently, and geographically it can affect differently as well. And finally, we're going to go through the 5E model, how we've adapted it slightly, and then in the end, go through these two engineering challenges that we have for you today. All right, so again in the chat, I'd like to know how familiar all of you are with the 5E model. I know that in some districts or even in some states, teachers are asked to develop lessons differently. So I'm just curious if you could add to the chat how familiar you are with the 5E model. Okay, familiar. All right. Great. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of familiar. Great. Been using it for project-based learning. Okay, this is great. So then I'll just run through this pretty quickly. But instead of a 5E model, we adapted this a little bit to a 6E model. So we just added an extra step. So really with this process, it's a great way, as I'm sure all of you already know, it's a great way to hit all of these different components of a lesson and make it really engaging and inquiry based and really allow your students to work through the process and come up with their own answers rather than being told the answers. And so I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, but if you want to take a look at some of our examples, such as engage, tell people about a local climate problem. So again, that locality is really going to be a point that's going to drive this home. Explore, have them build and test their model, and explain, start to contextualize the solutions. Elaborate, have them redo the design challenge, keeping in mind both what they learned from the first round and what they know about the system. And evaluate. So this is something that we're not going to go through today, but it's a component that could be added in, especially if you have older students who want to take things a step further. And again, encourage action. This is all about creating a dialogue and an engaging process for folks to learn about climate change and the actions they can take. And that's really what we're hoping that this can be for.
Emma, just as a to follow up on that great introduction that you did there, just to loop back at the beginning, you asked those who were logged in to think about what their students' interests were and what the local interests are and the challenges. So lots of comments about clean air, clean water, the impact of climate change on cities, and the impact on agriculture, and the issue of food deserts. Those were some of the most common responses. And then at least one person put in the challenge that is included in their work is that some of the families continue to question the anthropogenic nature of climate change, and therefore students come with sometimes misperceptions or an inclination to sort of question or doubt some of the information they're presented with. So those were some of the comments that teachers shared at the outset. So just putting it out there for you.
Yes, thank you. That is really good to know. I think what would be great is after the breakout rooms is we can come back and talk about the final activity, which is making it local, and have a brainstorm and just open up dialogue and see what folks have questions about. But thank you so much for sharing those. And those will be great to keep in mind for when we all come back together. So today's run of show, we are going to walk you through two activities. One is called Rising Tides that you'll do with Catherine, and the other, Cool Cities, you will be doing with me. And so we'll go through the activity, some ways that you can adapt it and scaffold it based on the grade level that you teach. And you'll have about 15 minutes with each activity. And in the end, we'll come back and do a brainstorm session. And that's when I'd love to hear about those answers that you put in the chat box, what your students are asking questions about. And finally, we'll do a making it local activity and really diving into issues that you see in your hometown. And we'll do a question and answer activity. And okay, so I'm just looking at the time. It is 10:20 right now. So if you'd like to, feel free to take a 5 or 10-minute break, and everyone will be placed into breakout rooms at 10:30.
Do you want to mention the materials that it would be good if people are able to gather during this little quick
Yes.
break so that they have a chance
Perfect.
to gather some materials before we do more breakouts at 10:30?
Sure. So if you wouldn't mind actually running off the list that was in the email, that would be really helpful.
Yes, I will put it in again. And then if you want to mention, like, from that list, what are the most.
I just did, I think
Oh,
so.
thank you. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
And again, it's okay if you don't have all of these supplies, you can still participate today. And this really doesn't have to be something that you have to have. These are just ways to showcase to you some activities that we have and how to adapt it to your classroom. So don't worry if you don't have all the materials, you can still have fun and engage with us today.
And Emma, if people are hanging out, and are you open to taking some questions? If
Sure. Yes, yes. And we also have Kate Carter on the line as well, Director of Community Science Education. So if there are questions that I don't know, maybe she could answer some. And then we also have Catherine Henry as well, who is a Graduate Student Outreach Fellow. So if you're interested in more aspects of what we do at NCSE, also feel free to ask questions.
Great. And so at 10:30, you want to do the breakout room.
Yeah, that would be great.
Perfect. 30, so we will assume everyone's back.
Okay, great. And feel free to keep the questions coming if you still have them, even during the breakout sessions. We're happy to answer more questions.
So anything before I send half the group off to a breakout room, anything else that they need to know? Or are we ready to just go ahead and go?
Yeah, I think we can get started. And again, don't worry if you don't have everything. This is just supposed to be fun and just some ideas this morning.
Great. All right. Looks like that has happened. So you have your group here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to move back. I hope that you'll be able to see this. But today in this activity, we're going to be talking about cool cities. And this is actually one of my favorite activities. And it's very relevant in the Bay Area. For example, I used to live in San Francisco for about 6 years, and I lived in a few different neighborhoods. And it was really apparent the disparities between the neighborhoods and how different resources were allocated in the cities. And so I will show you. This is how we began our activity. We just took a silicone ice cube tray, but something that you could also do, like I mentioned before, is just take a piece of paper and create a grid on your paper. So with this activity, what we invite students to do is we invite students to design their own city, thinking about how climate change would affect that area. So thinking about the materials that we're using, how we are bringing in different communities and where they're being housed, where there are parks, and how climate change might affect that area. So looking at temperature, access to water, access to food, all of these different aspects I think are going to be really important. And so something that's really fun is we in this activity actually are using real building materials. So we have some concrete blocks here and some asphalt blocks. This is actually really easy to get online and to make yourself. And this could even be something that once classes are returning to in person, this could be something fun to do with your students. And we also have some blocks that represent high rises or houses. And I also have a bucket of water with a little squirter here. What's really fun is now, after students design their own city, can check the temperature of all of the materials. And once you take a base temperature, I'm going to use a hair dryer and I'm going to add some heat to the city. And then I'm going to check the temperature again. And really the point of this process is to mimic what would happen with climate change. If the temperature rises, what happens to the people? How comfortable are they going to be living in concrete buildings, being around a lot of asphalt, being around water, in high rises? Where is their access to food? So something that I would actually like for you to do is to give me ideas of where you think I should put the buildings and the asphalt, which is just going to be the streets, and the concrete, which is going to be another kind of material. And then where should I put the water?
So, like, maybe the water could be on the outside of one of them, and then one row of cities, and then asphalt and
Okay,
concrete.
so
I don't know.
like a row of cities here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then put in some water. All right, and then, so we have some water in the front, cities, and now some asphalt.
I don't know. Yeah.
All right, and then finally have some concrete. And also, if your school or the community that you live in is not in a city, think about ways that you can adapt this to your area. So if you have an ocean nearby or a river nearby and you're not in a large city, or you're up in the mountains, that's really where the local component is going to come in, and you can have a discussion about how would you make a model of your actual community. So this is more like the community that I live in, but if other folks are living in different areas, this is kind of fun to have students make their own and really be able to test this out. All right, so I'm going to take the base temperature for everything. All right. So the concrete is coming in at 66 degrees. The wood is coming in at 67. The asphalt is coming in at 66. And the water is 63. So now I'm going to hit it with some heat, just using a handy dandy hairdryer. Okay, so now I'm going to check the temperature again, and I'd say I added heat to that for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. The asphalt is now 73 degrees. The wood is 72. The areas around the water are 68. And the concrete is 72. So for younger kids, you can have a discussion about building materials and about what the community looks like, and have them check the temperature and have a conversation about urban heat island effects. And this is something, just for the sake of time, that you can find more information about in the training guide. And then for older kids, this is really where you can jump into allocation of resources, food deserts, really looking at what each community looks like and what your resources are, and how would climate change affect that community directly. Now, if you're by an area of water, which you'll learn about in the other activity, being by a river versus an ocean, climate change is going to affect that community a little bit differently. And if people are crowded in high rises and it allows for more open space and for water and parks, what are the living conditions going to be like for those folks? So we have about 5 minutes left. Great. Okay. Noticing the materials are urban adventure cards. Yes. So that is something that students can go into after the discussion, and you can find those graphics on our website as well. That's something that I didn't bring out today just for the sake of time. But again, these are kind of different levels that you can go through depending upon your grade that you're teaching, how much time you have for the activity, and really how interested they are in this kind of conversation and what questions they have.
Emma, I wanted to ask a question, because this lesson, obviously you've been able to go through very quickly. If somebody was doing it with the students, they would obviously take more time and probably create a chart with, documenting the measurements and, really getting students involved in looking at the data as they're collecting and thinking about it as it's changing. But it's, I think, a really great example of using models. And so incorporating that next gen science standards practice of using a model to help explain something that's happening and explore it and make some predictions. And so I was just wondering if you, looking at those standards connections and that practice of modeling, what you've, learned about, talking about this kind of an activity as a way to really engage students in that practice of using models.
I think, personally, I think so. Even as an adult, having something tangible that you can use to show a particular topic or a particular lesson is so successful, because again, going back to that idea, and all of you teachers know, making something digestible and understandable for your students who might think about this concept in thinking that it's kind of out in the ether and there's nothing that they can really grasp onto that makes sense, having a model is a really great way to scale down a much larger issue and really making, for instance, this activity local and actually look like the community that you're in, because it's not going to be helpful if, for say, you're thinking about climate change and the only examples that you're given are things that don't even look like where you are. And especially for kids, that's something that's so important, is you want something for them to be able to connect to, and having models is just such a great visual. And again, you can scale it up with these different scaffolding situations, or you can scale it down and just look at this model. And I think especially using real world building materials is also pretty fun, because then you can also teach kids about different careers if they're interested in this. So architects and urban planners. And so you can really take this conversation in different ways.
And then there was another question about the resources. You held up the card.
Oh,
And
yes.
it's not in the PDF that we shared. So
Yes. Okay. Yes.
we can share out the link to all of the resources, but is it on your website with those resources?
It is on our website. So it's not in the training guide, but you can find these resources on our website. And I'll have Catherine pop the links in the chat box again, or also I'm sure I can retrieve all of your email addresses from the CRS team, and I'm happy to send you more links to the website so that you can get all the materials that you need.
And we'll be sending that out after this event. And what we'll do is put all of the links for this workshop, including the slides, the handouts, the PDFs, and the link to the recording. Those will all be shared out in an email with attendees, but also archived on our website, as with all of our PDs during this series. So if people miss them or they forgot, they'll all be archived on our website. So you'll be able to access those. And I just popped that link in, but these look like there's a lot of interest in beginning to use these. I think we have like 1 minute left. So I don't know if you want to spend another minute talking about how you would build on this activity with those urban adventure cards.
Sure. So again, with those urban adventure cards, I think that you all could again adapt this to what topics I think are most relevant in your community, and just what your environment actually looks like. So these urban adventure cards again are more associated with a city landscape, and taking a look at the food resources and just other topics of conversation that might be more suitable for older kids or for younger kids who are really just digesting the information. They really want to dive in and want to take it a step further. So these cards are a way to just add another guiding perspective to the activity. But it all depends upon what your students' interests are. And the graphics again are on the website, and you can change those around if need be.
Great. Well, I'm gonna, unfortunately, I thought we could just move Catherine and you. I can move you, but apparently Zoom is not letting me move Catherine. So I'm gonna quickly close the rooms and then re-juggle them and send
Not a problem.
So this group will stay together, so they'll get the second workshop.
Okay.
But just because of Zoom being Zoom, I'm gonna just do the easiest thing and close all the rooms. I just broadcast that they have a minute to wrap up.
Okay.
And I'm gonna send the close rooms, so they'll have another 59 seconds to make their way back here. And then when that happens, I will go ahead. Any other questions while we're waiting? If anybody else had other questions? Looks like everybody's eager to get the resources. Number one. Where would you get the material?
That's a good question.
Like concrete box sets and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great. So we ordered these materials in bulk. And for us, we knew that we were going to be making multiple kits because we send them out to a couple of our partners and our volunteers. So we were able to get bulk quantities, but that would actually be great for classrooms that everybody had a set. So we just ordered a lot of things on Amazon, but really for some of the other activities, I mean, if you're by a beach, you could get the sand, or in this activity, we also used water. We used some plant life as well. We did use plastic plant life, but a lot of times when we were on site, we would go pick up some of the materials wherever we were, because that's what was around us. And then the silicone ice trays we also purchased from Amazon, but also you could do this with construction paper and a grid. You can do this with an aluminum tray. You could do this just on a table or a workspace. So I think you can get creative with it, but bulk wise, we did get these from Amazon, most of the supplies.
Great. All right. I think, sorry for the people who were in the breakout room. I had to bring you all back because I wasn't able to move Catherine. But now I am going to be sending you back into your groups again. Thanks for being flexible with that. Jody, were you in, which activity were you in just now? I didn't catch Jody, so Jody might need to tell me.
I don't think she was in the breakout room.
She wasn't in ours.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I am going to open all rooms and send you back. Thank you. Hopefully that worked. And we should have Catherine. Catherine, are you here?
Yes, yes.
Perfect.
I think Terry was in the breakout room with me earlier. Does she need, or is maybe that's?
You're now with the other group.
Okay, perfect. I was just making sure. Yeah, so this is the Rising Tides activity. So I am, as Emma mentioned at the beginning, I'm a graduate student outreach with the National Center for Science Education. So I'm also a graduate student in studying at Michigan State University here in Michigan. So I've been living here for about 4 years. And people in Michigan definitely have a lot of pride for the Great Lakes. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and people can get really invested in the health and the quality of the lakes here. But one of the problems that we've been having in recent times is that there's been increased rates of erosion along the lakeshore. So in case you've never visited the Great Lakes, I have a picture here printed out. This is this would be along one of the Great Lakes, and you kind of get these like grassy areas which kind of turn into bluffs a little bit. And so when they erode, it can cause pretty big problems. As you can see here, there was a walkway that was along the lake shore where it's kind of eroded out from underneath it. And they've tried to build a wall here to protect. There's some poles over here as well. But some of this infrastructure is starting to crumble into the lakes. And we've even seen houses that haven't been moved quickly enough that have kind of fallen down the cliffside a little bit. And so this is a really big problem here in Michigan that people are concerned about. And so thinking about how can we have our infrastructure, how can we have our houses that are along the lakeshore, and how can they be protected from the waves. So I'm originally from the East Coast, and I was very surprised the first time to see how big the waves can get on the Great Lakes. So it's really similar to like when you're at the ocean, you get similar sized waves. So when you have these big storms that are coming in, they kind of pull the water along with it. The wind kind of pushes the water, and that's what ends up making the big waves. And they are just picking up sand and moving it. And so that's what's causing it to erode. And so during a big storm, you kind of get a storm surge, just like you do with the ocean as well. And so there's a kind of bigger amount of water that you have to be able to withstand. So for today's activity, we are going to think about how we might design some houses along one of these Great Lakes that could withstand one of these storm surges. So I have this set up right here. And if any of you are hoping to play along today, you can get your materials ready, but I just have to reset it a little bit from the first go. But what we have here is two trays that are nested in one another. These are everywhere right now with Thanksgiving coming up, but there's actually two metal trays. And the top one has holes poked into it along this side so that you can drain the water out. So right now there is water, just a thin level of water over here. And then we have a layer of sand, which is sloped so that it's higher up here and then lower down here, just kind of like it is along a shoreline. And then we have two houses. I just made some out of tinfoil since I didn't have any Monopoly houses. And then there are two straight pins that mark the zone where you can build houses. So you can place houses in this zone. So this is the basic setup when someone comes up. So this is kind of like the default setup for the activity. And then what we have in the standard activity kit, but there's a lot of materials that you could use. We have pipe cleaners. We have pony beads, which are just those kind of like larger plastic beads. Popsicle sticks. We have some pieces of sponge, kind of different sizes. And then we also have some toothpicks. So these are the materials that we typically have with this, but there's obviously a lot of, these are really simple shapes and designs. So there's a lot of different things that you could substitute based on what you have available and what's cost effective. And so the challenge is to build some sort of structure that protects these houses that we have along the shoreline of the Great Lakes from the storm surge that's going to come in. So we'll have about 2 cups of water or half a liter that will add to this, and we'll add the water over here. And we need to have the houses prepared so that they don't get blown away when the water comes. So does anybody, with all these materials we have, again, the pipe cleaners, beads, sponges, does anyone have suggestions of what we might want to try with our setup to protect the houses for when the water comes? And you can just go ahead and unmute if you have a suggestion of how we might use these materials.
I'm not an engineer, but can we elevate them?
Yeah, we could definitely elevate them. What do you want to try to use to elevate them? I guess we have a couple different options.
I don't know, make some kind of box with the well, I guess the toothpicks or the popsicle sticks, either one.
Yeah. Yeah, so I will put this back down so we can see it. We'll kind of do it as we go along. We'll try some different things. So I will, yeah, we can definitely elevate them on the toothpicks. That's a great suggestion. What else? What else could we do? And I'll probably just do this for one house since, for time's sake.
We could possibly create some sort of like shoreline barrier, something that the waves could hit before it hits the community.
Yes, yeah. What might you want to use for the barrier?
I'm thinking of some sort of like popsicle sticks, sort of like stacked up against like a toothpick or two.
Oh yeah, that would be cool. We'll set that up. So that would be similar to, in the picture we saw, people will try to build walls along the shoreline to kind of dampen the impact of the waves as they hit the shore, to hopefully try to slow this erosion. And I'm going to move this back a little bit in our zone so I have more room to put the wall. And the stilts, I forgot to mention too, but the stilts, plenty of houses in coastal areas are actually built up on stilts. So it allows the water to move under the house as opposed to hitting the house and applying a lot of pressure. So cool. there anything, we're doing okay on time. Anything else we want to try before we give this a test?
I was thinking, Catherine, maybe to add to that protection, maybe the sponges could serve kind of like, what do they say, estuaries or plant life can kind of absorb, because they're absorbing in nature. So maybe they could kind of be a proxy for plant life.
Yeah, that would be great. So just like you said, wetlands are a great way to slow down the flow of water. Dune grass has really deep roots, which would also kind of stabilize the sand so that it doesn't move. So we can add some sponges. Awesome. Well, let's give this a go since looks like we're kind of getting on time. So this, I have it in a bucket because I just dumped it out, but this is about like the ½ liter of water. So we'll add this in and see, just watch and see how it goes. Awesome. So what did people notice? What happened when we added the water in? This is kind of the aftermath. So I noticed the sponges are floating out in the water. They maybe helped, but maybe weren't so secure in the sand. So maybe that's something that we noticed is the sponges are now floating.
I noticed that the water, when you poured it, it was more powerful than I was imagining.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised with this size of tray, which is for like casserole size, I don't know. It really, that amount of water really, it makes a big difference. And it really kind of surges up there. Yeah.
I noticed that when the water was kind of surging towards the house, the barrier of toothpicks and the popsicle sticks, like the popsicle sticks kind of moved into the house, which is something that I was worrying about. But
Oh,
it
yeah.
looked like it hit the stilts of the house and sort of like bounced off in an effective way.
Okay, yeah. So maybe this was only secured on one side, so maybe securing it either on the other side or on both sides might be something we want to try. Yeah, but I mean, overall, our house is still, there's water up below the house, but the house is in the exact same place. So the focus is kind of on what went well and what we might want to try in the future. So I'll just briefly touch on some of the ways at this point, you reflect on what went well with the first design, some things that maybe didn't go so well, like how I placed the sponges. So it's thinking about what you can improve on for the next time. And then to make it more difficult, and especially depending on the ages, with the activity kit, and it got wet, so it's a little, this is one example of a price list. So you could have all of the materials have different costs, and the students might be challenged to come up with a design that's effective, but also cost effective. So they only have so much money to spend, and what materials do they want to purchase? That's one way to modify this and make it more difficult.
Can I interject, Catherine? Just
Yeah.
as a lot of these sessions, there's a lot of interest by teachers in sharing kind of the social impact questions with their students and looking at differences between, say, more affluent communities and historically marginalized communities. And that's a great way to bring that up, because you could talk about a coastline where there are similar communities having the same environmental impacts, but having different resources to bring to bear to solve some of the challenges. And so by having the cost associated, that makes it really clear that, some folks are able to spend more to mitigate the impacts and others who don't have that. So it's a really great example to bring that in a really concrete, tangible way for students.
Yeah, that would be a great application. I've done, I used to work in environmental ed where we kind of did these activities, and something similar to what you suggested too was we used to do an activity with building a jetty where they would do like a town hall. So people had different perspectives on whether or not they wanted to build a jetty, or you could definitely pull something in similar too with students having different viewpoints of coming up with, well, this is a problem that's affecting everybody, but not everybody has the same resources. So coming up with some sort of solution and having to discuss that might also be another way to expand that activity a lot. But that's a great point. Students having different amounts of money to spend.
And I think we have about a minute or two left before the schedule says I'm supposed to bring everybody back.
Yeah.
And so as I did in the other session, just kind of wanting to point out that this is a very powerful example of engaging students in the next gen science standards practice of using models, both to predict and to explain, right, phenomena that are happening. So by doing an activity like this, you're really engaging in that practice of using a model, and a chance to sort of talk with students about the power of a model to show us things, but also the limitations of a model to account for, absolutely everything in the real world, and really show them and engage them in thinking about using models and why and how scientists use models to solve problems.
And we've been getting a lot of, just to kind of piggyback on that, that sometimes we think of models as only physical, but so the first step in modeling is what's inside of our heads. Like, what do we already know? What's our prior knowledge? How do we think of something? And then how do we get that out to share with others? So sometimes diagramming, written descriptions of something as a first pass at sort of putting our own models out there. And we've been getting from other workshops, a lot of teachers and educators are using the strategy of then doing gallery walks to sort of share out each student's impression of something and their own prior knowledge and what their model looks like first. Then they do the gallery walk, gather more knowledge, iterate their model, and then it could take us into sort of the depth that you did with us, Catherine, a physical model. And what does that look like? And then at the end, there's also the sort of, how does my model really represent real life, but what are the limitations of the model? I was thinking about Emma's activity in this regard, where she was using the hairdryer to warm up the city, and she was doing it in very specific areas of the city. So maybe some of the heat was dispersing before she was able to get the second set of data on the temperature. So it may not have been an even distribution of heating up the system. Same thing with the sponges, the way they floated for us, like, maybe I was thinking it would serve as a good proxy for, like what you were saying, estuaries and green spaces, but maybe overall it didn't. And your point, Catherine, about anchoring it somehow so that it didn't start floating. So again, the materials don't always act as we think, and that's a limitation of a model. But hopefully, as we iterate and build our understanding, the models get closer. And sometimes some models represent phenomena better than others. So it's keeping that in mind too.
Yeah. Yeah, if we had more time too, one step could be too, if you're saying like the gallery walk, like diagramming, coming up with drawing out how they're going to kind of approach the problem would definitely be a step to add in. Yeah, if we had more time, we would have done that too. Yeah.
Great.
And so in terms of synchronous and asynchronous learning that lots of teachers are struggling with right now, this is a good example of something that you could do both during live instruction time in more of a demo format as you did, but taking suggestions from the students about what to try and testing it, but also something that could potentially be assigned as an asynchronous learning activity for students to do at home, and then share back their data and their responses, take videos, take pictures, share in their journals. So this has a lot of flexibility to be adapted for the distance learning.
Yeah. I was thinking, and obviously these materials, so with the holes too, I'll just show quickly, you can drain it out when you have the two trays. So now the water's all draining out of holes in the top one. But if students have, there's a lot of different ways to do this setup without it having to be so, having to have the two aluminum trays and everything. You could do it outside, you could do it in a bathtub. I mean, maybe don't let sand go down the bathtub, but there's a lot of ways that they could use different materials that they have on hand to do this same problem without having to have everything perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that. And now, paint trays work well. some other good suggestions coming in about other materials that work well for this. So
Great.
Keep those suggestions coming. And I think we're all back together now.
Okay. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you were able to talk with the other teachers in your group and have a bit of a brainstorm. And just to be cognizant of everyone's time, we have about 20 minutes left. So I would love to talk about how how to make these activities local. For the sake of time, I wanted to point you to the Making It Local PDF that was shared in your email. And this is where you can find more details about how to adapt these activities. So I'll just run through this very quickly, and then I'd love to have everybody ask some questions and really talk about some local issues that they're experiencing. So for rising tides, some questions you could think about is, are you by an ocean or a river? And the different bodies of water are going to be affected by climate change differently. And there are also some really great models that are listed in this document as well that you can check out online. And this is a fun way to explore these changes with your students. And for cool cities, taking a look at some geographic constraints or also materialistic constraints. So are you by any roads or bodies of water? Are you limited to any kind of construction materials? And how are you setting up your population, and what do these communities have access to with regards to resources? And finally, taking a look at climate equity is a huge, huge issue. And again, you can find more information on the document that was sent to you that takes a deeper dive into how to adapt these activities to your location. But I wanted to take the rest of the time today to just open it up and see what kinds of questions your students are asking and what issues you're seeing in your environment, and just have a discussion.
And feel free to unmute and popcorn out your questions, as well as, of course, you're welcome to type them into chat. Does anyone have any thoughts about how they might use something they learned today with their students?
One question that's coming in, I'm wondering how we use field trips in the inner city and critically think about the overdevelopment of buildings. That's a really good question. I'm wondering if anybody else on the call here today has had an experience with that and could give an example or has some insight that they'd like to share.
I know one thing that we hear about is the idea of different types of deserts. So like food deserts or green space deserts. And so this idea of, I'm thinking about East Oakland, where I live in Oakland, and that community is, or the Fruitvale in Oakland, very densely populated, very few green spaces. And so there's been a lot of effort to sort of utilize what is there to sort of bring students and folks into these spaces and get them thinking about that relationship to the land and how important these green spaces are. So I think field trips are a great way. Also, my mind goes to mapping. I think I love maps. And so to start this concept of how to make it local, look at your city or your region and what does it look like physically? Where are the bodies of water? Where are the urban areas? Where are the green spaces? And then start to overlay some of the equity issues with cultures and communities and access to resources. So there might be some interesting mapping extensions that you could sort of scaffold onto this, especially with the middle and high school students.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's a really great example. And if your students are still remote, one thing that you could also do is do a walking tour of your neighborhood if it's safe to do so, and just get more of a view of what's going on. And like Eric said, I think a map would be great, and have students make their own map and try to figure out for themselves proximity to all these resources. That's a really great idea.
We're just looking at how much of it is built and how much of it is some kind of organic, grass or a tree or dirt, or even what are the surfaces that are in a place.
And there's some cities that are tree cities. So you could compare those, like I know Stockton, California is a tree city. And if you compare the temps, the average temps to another city like Modesto, I don't think is, that might be because they're in the same region.
You might even be able to get that information from the just weather data.
Yeah, I know there's a list somewhere because I've used it before, but I don't know where.
We'll look for that. Tree cities, that's a good one.
That's really great.
I know that one of the issues that might touch on this topic a little bit in terms of local news, I remember maybe a year or two ago in San Francisco, there was a proposal for a high-rise development in a particular neighborhood, and the objections that were being raised from the local community had to do with the shade that it was creating. And there was a basketball court adjacent, and I think there was a local some rules about the shade impacts from high-rise construction. And so there was a really robust community discussion around the trade-off of, you know, bringing more jobs or more housing or whatever this building was going to offer to the community, while at the same time taking away potentially access to sunlight for children in the neighborhood wanting to be able to use this park or basketball court or whatever it was. So you can find those kinds of stories in the news in terms of impacts in urban areas that really provide tangible jumping off points for students to really relate to these issues in a way that's meaningful in their lives.
That's a great idea. I agree. It's wonderful to bring in those real world examples. I was also mentioning to the second group that I had, if your students are interested, looking at, like you mentioned, newspapers or other case studies, and really taking a look at other examples, even just outside of your community, and just comparing, making comparisons.
And
somebody
what
popped
Eric-
that Tree Cities link in, so thanks in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Catherine.
what Eric was saying too about like maps, a lot of times you can get maps that show the floodplain area, and people are just shocked to see that their house is actually on a floodplain. Like I know around Stockton, you know, it shows the levees and they'll be like up to the second story window, but people have never really thought about the fact that if that levee breaks, the water will be up to their second story window. So that mapping thing and showing where floodplains actually are.
Yeah,
You know.
that's wonderful. That's a really good resource.
Yeah.
And I believe the whatever, I'm blanking on the name, the Corps of Engineers floodplain maps have been recently revised in some areas to expand some of the areas that are considered floodplains from when the maps were created a long time ago.
That's wonderful. Thank you. This is really neat. Thank you for sharing all of your examples. And let's see, we have about 15 minutes left. So feel free to continue to ask some questions if you're interested.
I'm going to quickly, while people might be thinking about popping out with their questions or typing it into the chat, just make a note of one more thing I shared in the chat with you following up from this. So we will share out the resources. The first link is where you will find those, and those will go out by email as well. We also have a curated page of resources that are all focused on lesson plans, teacher toolkits, citizen science, student action projects. These resources that have been shared with you today will be added there as well, but that's going to be an ongoing work in progress. So if you're looking for how can I connect to citizen science around clean air or clean water, or how can I look at a student action project around cleaning up waste or recycling, we will have all of those resources curated on that second link. And then the third link that I shared is our updated, in this time of distance learning, what are our local resource centers, science centers, and other partners offering for teachers? And that is also a live webpage that we continue to update as conditions and offerings change. So those are three resources you may want to bookmark.
Thank you so much. And I can also add in my email in the chat. So if anyone would like to email us, I'm happy to send more resources there as well.
Kind of picking up on the frame that Emma and Catherine set up for us at the beginning of the workshop too, about solutions orientation of our work and equity issues and relevancy to the community. Another big one for urban populations, especially exacerbated by COVID, is food insecurity. So there's a lot of populations that are really grappling with that, and how do we just get them the food that they need? And it had already been an issue, right, pre-COVID, with just nutrition and, again, the deserts. So I think what I'm realizing here, through different conversations and all the workshops that we've been participating in and helping to run, is that there's so many awesome case studies at the very local level, and that back to the empowerment idea and students taking action, you know, just starting a garden or participating in an urban garden, or can just be so empowering for students, both from just the science learning of how do I grow and propagate a plant, but that, wow, I can make something that I can now eat. And you know, and it's hard, and we've talked about equity around this. Sometimes West Oakland has problems with mercury pollution, so it's not always something that's completely accessible. So, but then maybe we start a potted garden at the school or in our, you know, so just trying to think through how to grapple with some of these bigger issues, and then highlighting these very local case studies. I think that's, for me, I'm realizing how important it is to inspire the students, because climate is such a huge, heavy issue, but there's so many good things happening at the very local level, and students, I think, really should feel the agency that they can get involved in those things.
I completely agree. That's great. That's definitely something that can be really successful, and to alleviate some of that anxiety about thinking about the effects all over the world, and just scaling it down to what students are seeing in their own backyard.
You know, talking about like mapping your neighborhood or mapping your community, you can also map the positive things that are happening. You could go walk and say, how many people have solar panels, or how many electric cars do you see, or how many people have bee gardens, or what kinds of things are actually happening right around us all the time that are supporting reducing global warming and protecting the environment, and, you know, maybe addressing food issue or whatever the issues are, but it's there in front of us. And that's kind of inspiring too, to see that it's happening. And that's right outside your door for some people.
And someone put
Not
in a great comment to kind of connect with that there are, they're asking if there are some articles or journals that center on the impact in various specific cities. So if you were asking different students in your class to take different parts of the world, different parts of the United States, different parts of California, however you might want to segment it, and hone in on what are the differences, what are the issues that they're facing, and how are they addressing them. And then I think that's a powerful way to bring in the example that you're talking about, Betsy, in terms of what are the positive, where's the hope, you know, what are the positive things that are happening. I think I remember seeing a delightful story, it might have been in the BBC, about a city in Europe that was combating the bee colony collapse problems by converting all of their bus stops into these elevated gardens that were attracting pollinators.
Oh, yeah.
Delightful to see. There's a really creative solution, and I believe youth was really involved in helping to design that solution. So I think, to your point of asking about articles and things, those are resources we will continue to put on that curated page of resources and to share out. And if any of you come across them, please share them with us. We will continue to look for those great examples.
Thank you so much again for joining us today. I was really happy to have all of your really great questions and to meet you all. And I'm glad that you were interested in learning about this and having the discussion.
Any last questions?
There's a great comment here. The access to plants and gardens should not be only for wealthy people. In the apartment building I am at in downtown Oakland, we residents have to negotiate with our landlord for the permission to grow a small garden area. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's even like, you know, you're not supposed to put certain things out on your balcony, or you're not supposed to do certain things. And if you go into like lower income neighborhoods, a lot of times they'll have garden, you know, at least where I am, you know, they'll have gardens. But if you've got an organization that's telling you, no, you can't do this, you can't hang out your clothes, you can't do this, you know, all those things that could save money and save the environment, you're not allowed to do. So those kind of questions. And then the other thing I was going to say is like building materials, like native building materials from around the world, that gets kids starting to
Oh, nice.
like straw bale houses or, you know, adobe bricks. They start thinking, okay, there's different ways of doing something than the way it's always been done.
Absolutely. That's such an awesome idea. And you can even bring in, you know, the historical aspect from, you know, thousands of years ago and what structures looks like today and what's enduring. I think that's awesome. That would be a really great connection to bring in the history and the engineering and the architecture and the science and just bring in any connection points to what your students are interested in.
And I think Joy's point, like it also gives you another access, another way in, or another avenue to take some of these things. So you do the activity where they kind of learn some of this, but then you extend the activity to some sort of social action. So now let's write a letter to our, you know, to our local city council, you know, so that some of those kind of city ordinances and rules maybe are changed slightly. And, you know, and getting kids and thinking about, you know, what are some of the barriers to doing the things that we want to do? And then how can we help change some of those barriers? And, you know, and even if it's just simply, you know, I mean, in the process, they're learning how to write a letter. And I think it also helps make their learning more tangible. Like, you know, there's a reason why we're learning this in science class, you know, that it's not just because it's one of the standards. It's, you know, it's because it can actually have an impact on our lives. So
exactly, that's wonderful. It's something that they can actually do, and they can track the process of and learn about bills in the community. And I think that's great as well, bringing in a really real world process. So that's wonderful. Thank you for all of those ideas. This was so much fun. I hope that you all enjoyed it. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your weekend, and take care.
Yeah, thank you so much, team. You guys did a great job for sharing all of this, and we really appreciate it. And as we said, we will be sharing out all of these resources. Keep your questions, your ideas, your thoughts coming, especially for the things that you were, you know, we've ended up talking about, these how to connect to our communities, how to engage kids in, now they've learned the science, what are some real world actions they can take, and how to also learn to navigate. How do you find the right inflection point? Sometimes these problems feel so big. Where do I start? Who do I turn to? Who do I actually write the letter to, right? So these are really, really great. And I love the example that several of you have brought up, both in your comments and in the chat, around the simple things like hanging clothes to dry, and how that might be prohibited in some places where people live. And so there's a really accessible potential point for students to take some action, right, to explain and advocate why rules that might prevent that should be changed, and how that they could be changed and still manage whatever the concerns were that created those rules in the first place. So really great ways for teachers to find to sort of right size effective student actions that can teach and engage students in their skills. So much potential here. Thank you for sharing, Emma and Catherine and your whole team, some of these great resources. And we're looking to continue to build this professional learning community and keep this momentum going, even as we're all at a distance and dealing with the challenges that that come with this year in teaching in the pandemic. But that's part of this whole issue. Pandemics are going to be increasing with all of the climate change impacts. This was not a surprise. This was predicted. So we can also learn a lot from this. So thank you, everyone, and please continue to be engaged and stay connected, and we'll keep moving this work forward.
Thank you so much for joining. It was great to meet you all.